Says we're live. I like to check it on Facebook before I bring my guest up. So hold on one second, everybody. And let's see. Yep, we sound pretty good over there. These are constitutional deep dives. They're spinoff conversations from Of, By, and For the People. On those shows, usually we do those on Mondays, unless we have a special episode. We add narrative, we talk headlines, we actually give both sides to most stories. They're good conversations, and you can find those Of, By, and For the People on your favorite podcast platform. These are more centered around just talking about why, how, when, how it's changed, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. We're going through all the founding documents. It's going to take us 7 years, 37 days, 12 hours, and 6 minutes, I think, according to Eric Buchanan. But Eric is the constitutional guy. And so basically, what he does, he comes on, he kind of walks us through one small thing at a time. I ask some questions, and we either remember why something was put in place, or maybe we learn some stuff as well. And just to be honest with you, we started this because a lot of people you'll hear tear things down, and it's a big we both believe this. Before you start tearing stuff down, it's good to know why it's been built and how it's changed and how it's protected us, how it's helped us grow, and maybe how it's hurt us, and realizing there's a system in place to change these things if we don't like it, instead of just saying let's burn it all to the ground. So with that being said, let's bring Eric up to start. 3, 2, 1. Eric Buchanan, what's up, buddy?
Hey, Clint, how are you? Good to see you today.
Hey, good seeing you, man. We're talking about Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4. I don't know how this one got in there. I mean, because I'll let you explain it, but we're going to be talking about naturalization, right? How to become a U.S. citizen.
That's right. That's right there in the Constitution.
It
And
is.
today we're going to talk a little bit about women's rights historically. That'll fall
Mhm.
in here.
Okay.
Draft dodgers. That's going to come up today. And a little bit about a famous short story from the 1800s called Man Without a Country. I think that's going to fit into our conversation today.
Well, before we start that, normally you read it to us, but before you do that, tell us who you are, what you do, and then if you want to just jump right in and read it, and we'll start the whole civics class 101 right here.
Yeah, so hi everybody. My name is Eric Buchanan. I'm a disability insurance attorney in Chattanooga, Tennessee. First, a little bit about my law firm. My law firm, Eric Buchanan and Associates, helps people all over the United States who've been denied long-term disability insurance, private disability insurance. Anytime you have an insurance policy, whether it's a group policy at work or a private disability insurance policy that you bought on your own, we can help if the insurance company is not giving you the answers you want to hear, if they're giving you the runaround, if they're not paying your benefits. If you have a disability pension through a pension plan, we can help. If you have long-term care insurance, we can help with that. We can help with life insurance, and we can help with health insurance. If you have any questions about any of those types of claims, any types of those policies, anytime you filed a claim with the insurance company and you don't like what they're saying, give us a call. Our phone number is 877-634-2506. That's our toll-free number. And we can be found on the World Wide Web at buchanandisability.com. Very quickly about me, I went to the Virginia Military Institute where I was a history major. I especially loved American history. I graduated and took a commission in the Navy, ended up flying P-3s during the end of the Cold War in the early 1990s. Chasing Russian submarines around the North Atlantic was what I spent a big chunk of my professional time doing. After that, I went to law school at Washington and Lee. I paid a special attention to constitutional law, took extra classes on constitutional law, and I was even my constitutional law professor's research assistant. So I really enjoyed talking about the U.S. history in the context of the Constitution and our laws, especially.
And the nicest things he ever said about me is every now and then he'll tell me that I am sounding like a founding father, and that makes me feel pretty good. That makes me feel smarter than I really am. Uh,
Sometimes you do, Clint. All right, so here we
Sometimes,
let me read this out loud. So
yeah.
remember where we are in the Constitution. Article 1 describes the powers, responsibilities, duties of the legislature, of the Senate and the House of Representatives, the part of our government that can pass the laws. Article 1, Section 8 is a list of those things that Congress can pass laws about. So the way our Constitution is set up, states have what's called plenary power. They can pass laws about anything that a government normally could pass laws about, limited by the Bill of Rights and the other rights that we have. But the federal government can't pass a law just about anything. The federal government can only pass laws in those areas listed in the Constitution. And where's the main list found? It's Article 1, Section 8, has 18 clauses. If you break it down, it has about 26 different points within those 18 clauses. That's the instruction list. That's the limiting list of those things that Congress can pass a law about. Now, technically, there's some other stuff in the amendments and a few other places found throughout the Constitution that Congress has certain other powers and certain things they can do. But this is the main list of those things Congress has the power to do. In
Okay.
Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4, where we are today, Congress shall have the power to establish a uniform rule of naturalization and uniform laws on the subject of bankruptcies throughout the United States. Today, we're going to talk about uniform rules of naturalization. Next week, we'll talk about the uniform laws on bankruptcies.
And let's just be honest, those two fit so naturally together.
We'll talk next time about when we talk about bankruptcies, we'll talk about why those two are in the same clause. I'm going to just
Okay.
kind of leave that as a teaser for next time. What we're going to
Okay.
talk about today, what is the rule of naturalization? It's basically the idea of how do you become a US citizen?
Hmm.
How does citizenship work in the United States? And we're also going to talk about how can you lose your citizenship? Can you, if you're already a United States citizen, can it be taken away? Can you become a man without a country? A
Ooh.
famous book we'll talk about later on toward the end of this. So when the founding fathers were getting together at the Constitutional Convention, one of the problems that they decided, the reason we need to update the Articles of Confederation, we need a constitution, we need a new set of rules that's going to address some stuff. One of the big problems was when the United States declared independence on July 4th, 1776, and we started working on the Articles of Confederation, which we kind of operated under for several years and eventually adopted in the early 1780s. Each colony effectively was acting as its own country, including being able to decide who became a citizen of that state that had been created on July 4th, 1776. So if South Carolina said, in order to be a citizen, you have to own property, they could say that. In Massachusetts, they can say anybody who came here for 30 days, they can say that. Now, they didn't really say that, but those are the kind of rules you could have had in place. Each state had the ability to set their own rules. If a new person came from France after July 4th, 1776, how long did they have to live in New York before they could become a U.S. citizen or become a New York citizen? And each state had something different. And so when the founding fathers sat down with the Constitution, they said one of the things we have got to address is the fact that we've got this hodgepodge of rules. Clint, you started to say something?
Yeah, I was going to, but I thought I was doing those daily facts for the month of July. Wasn't Virginia? Was it Virginia? Not Virginia. What state was it that actually declared independence from England at the same time? Basically, we had we had the separation from the colonies, but there was another state that did it, and then like 30 days later, they said no, we'll come in with you, the colonies. I can't remember who it was now.
Oh,
Anyway, I'll
you had something on Vermont in one of your
maybe
podcasts.
that was it. Maybe that
So
was it.
side note, everybody, let's just talk about this really quick. There are 13 independent colonies that each said we're going to become separate states. Vermont was not one of them. When you ask a kid who's in high school or junior high when they study American history, what were the 13 original colonies? If they can still answer that question, one of the trick questions is trying to go down through the different states on the East Coast. Maine was not an original colony; it was still part of the Plymouth Plantation, and
Mhm.
Vermont was a territory between New Hampshire and New York and a little bit of Massachusetts, and they hadn't really agreed on who had what yet. You even had the Green Mountain Boys running around up there fighting over whose property rights would be enforced, who had the right to own the land, who had the right to grant the land. Where
Yeah.
would you go to court if somebody fought over your land? Vermont was kind of this separate disputed territory,
It was Vermont, by the way.
mostly between New
Yeah.
York and Massachusetts. And so it did not join in the 13 original colonies. It was actually not considered one of the original states. After the United States Constitution was put in place, Vermont then became a state later
Yep.
on. I'm pretty sure they were the 14th state. They were the
I
next
just
state.
wanted the reason I brought it up is I always have find it fascinating when we go down these deep dives, the relationship between the development and the growth of our federal government and the independent and the sovereignty of our states. We find a lot of conflict in that, which is exactly what I think our founding fathers wanted. But that's why it reminded me of it. So continue on. I didn't mean to hijack it.
No, no, you're fine. So back to the
Yeah.
what the founding fathers were scratching their heads about at the Constitutional Convention was this idea that these 13 states, plus this territory up there that would eventually someday become Maine, or this territory that was fought over in Vermont, who would set the rules for whether somebody could become a citizen of the United States? And Alexander Hamilton actually wrote about this in Federalist 32, and he said, we have to have a uniform rule of naturalization. It must necessarily be exclusive. i.e., the federal government is the only one that can do it. Because if each state had the power to describe a distinct rule, there could not be a uniform rule. There'd be 13 different rules, and somebody would move to the United States and go to the state that would be the easiest one to let them in. James Madison also recognized this to be a problem. And he actually, in Federalist number 42, said that having different state rules, different state practices was a fault and a defect in the Articles of Confederation. So when they sat down at the Constitutional Convention, which was really supposed to be to update and amend the Articles of Confederation, it ended up being a whole new constitution. They knew that what they needed to add was this idea of that the federal government would set the rules for who can become a United States citizen. It turned out that once they put it on the table, that they would list it as one of the things that Congress could pass laws on. Uh, there was basically no opposition. So here were some of the things left on the table, though. When the Constitution was signed, and the states started to adopt it, what were the different questions that Congress was going to have to ask? Well, one question would be, do states have any role anymore in deciding who can be a citizen, or is it an exclusive power of the federal Congress? Uh, what are the different ways you can become a citizen? Now, Clint, I know you like Latin, so we're going to do a little Latin
Yeah,
lesson here
I'm
because
big Latin guy.
you're a big Latin guy. Without
Yeah.
actually using the Latin phrases yet, what do you think? What are the different ways somebody can become a citizen of a country?
Around the world
Traditionally,
or just ours?
anywhere in the world, what are the different traditions?
I don't tradition. I'm guessing here. I would think some would be like money. I bet you could buy your way in some places. Seriously, I bet you could volunteer to be in the military, marry in, or be born in from people that have already gone through the naturalization process. Those are a few, I'm guessing.
Okay, what about the idea of where you are born?
Well, that's what I was kind of saying. Like, for instance, if Eric and Meg were my mom and dad, God bless you too, by the way. Y'all have done a piss poor job raising me. But if y'all had come here and gone through the naturalization
Well,
process
we
and I
were
was
awfully
born
young
here,
when we had you.
yeah,
I
it's
think
like
Meg was 3.
yeah, good luck. Yeah, there's some laws that were broken, I do believe. But I guess that's my point. You mean where you're born at? I guess if you're born in the country, you're a citizen, if
Okay,
depending on the rules.
so there's a Latin term for that rule, and it's called jus soli. And what
Just
that
solely.
means is it's called birthright citizenship,
Right.
that you get to become a citizen in the country where you are born. If you look it up online, there's actually a map that shows generally what countries allow for jus soli. It's
Mhm.
most of the countries in the Western Hemisphere: Canada, Mexico, United States, most of the Central American and South American countries. It is not most of the Asian countries. It is not much of Europe, and it's not much of Africa. It's actually much more rare. So if you're born in Russia, you are not a Russian.
Can I ask a quick question though? Because
Yeah,
I'm just trying to put so if Clinton, a guest or whoever, my plus one, I'm taking to another country and she happens to be pregnant. Let's say I go someplace. If they come to the United States as just visiting, but their kid's born while they're here, that's not what you're talking about,
that
right?
is what I'm talking about. There's an exception, which I'm not going to get too deep into. If people want to ask about it, I can explore it. But unless you are a diplomat, you with diplomatic immunity and serving as a diplomat of a foreign country, otherwise, if you're in the United States and you have a baby, that baby is a U.S. citizen.
Hmm.
That baby is a U.S. citizen because it was born in the United States.
Wow. Okay. I mean, I
Uh,
knew that when we're talking about immigration. I didn't know that about just if I'm taking a
and
visit.
it's actually become a political thing too, to some point, because I don't want to get into the politics of
Right.
picking a side, but I'll just put it out there: is one of the things that Donald Trump had proposed was that you couldn't have what's called anchor babies.
Hmm.
And the idea is a pregnant woman crosses the border illegally but has the baby in the United States, that
Hmm.
baby is a US citizen. So the 14th Amendment is part of what we're talking about today. In the 14th Amendment, it basically says all people born in the United States are citizens of the United States. So if you're born here, even if your mother crossed the border illegally, you are a US citizen. Okay? That is not true in other countries. If you and your let's say you get your new girlfriend pregnant, Clint.
Okay.
Clint does not have
Yeah.
a girlfriend, ladies, right now that I
Yeah.
know of. So he is
And don't
available.
worry, don't worry. I've been fixed. There's no getting pregnant, but in a different world.
In
Yes.
the different world, let's say you and your
I have
25 year
done
old
that before.
girlfriend go on if you and your 25-year-old girlfriend go on vacation to Russia and have a baby over
Uh-huh.
there,
Right.
that baby is not a Russian citizen because Russia does not follow the law of jus soli.
Okay.
Because jus soli basically says if you're born here, we're going to make you citizen no matter who your parents are. That's actually rare in the Eastern Hemisphere, in Asia, Europe. It's some countries in Europe, but it's not many. It is not the law in, say, Russia or a lot of African countries or a lot of Asian countries.
Right.
It is the law in Canada, the United States, Mexico, and a lot of Central American countries. What's another way you can become a U.S. citizen by birth?
Hmm. Well, I mean, I said it earlier. If your parents had gone through the naturalization process, but at that point they're already citizens. So I don't know.
So, what if you and your wife have that baby in Russia? What country is that baby a citizen of?
Wherever you came from.
So does Russia recognize that kid? No, we already said no because
Right.
it doesn't follow jus soli
Right.
or jus soli. It so there's the United States follows also a rule called jus sanguinis.
Okay.
Jus sanguinis, it's the law of the blood. If
Okay.
a baby is born anywhere in the world and one of the two parents of that baby are a US citizen,
They're a citizen.
they're a citizen.
Okay, so let me interrupt because this is going to be one I just have to do this with. I go to I go to my mom's American, marries somebody from Russia. She moves there. She keeps dual citizenship if it's possible, whatever. I'm born over there. I'm a member. Do I become a
Let's
citizen
just
of
say she
Russia?
keeps
And
US citizenship,
right,
to be clear about it. Let's
yeah.
hold off on the dual citizenship complication
Well, I was
because
going
we'll
to
get to
ask,
that
does
later
that?
in this episode.
But that's what I was going
Don't
to
ask
ask.
about dual citizenship yet, Clint. Just
You
keep your
suck.
hypothetical clean.
All right, let me
Your
write that
mom
down.
your mom goes and marries a Russian. She's a mail order bride to Moscow.
Okay.
And when she's there, she marries a Russian, but she's still a US citizen living abroad, and she has a baby.
Right. So
That
I was
baby is a US citizen.
gotcha.
Now, we'll talk about this as we get through this podcast. There used to be a rule that in order for that baby to keep its citizenship,
Mhm.
it had to go live in the United States a certain number of years before a certain age.
Okay.
I'll get to the details of that in a little bit.
All right.
But that rule is no longer in effect.
The horse and the cart are back in the right order, sir.
So you can become a U.S. citizen by being born in the United States. You can become a U.S. citizen by having a parent who's a U.S. citizen when they give birth to you, even if you are living in a country
Abroad.
outside the United
Yeah.
States. How else can you become a U.S. citizen?
Hmm. I don't know.
Go through the naturalization
Well,
process.
yeah, but I mean that's
Go
what we're
through the
talking about.
normal
Yeah.
way to apply.
Yeah. But there's
So
certain rules around that too. You have to live here so long and all that.
there
So
are, and we'll get to
yeah.
those rules later. But the point is, the United States has basically all of the options that are found in various countries. A lot of countries say just because you were born here, kid, does not make you a citizen. Some countries say just because your parents were a citizen doesn't make you a citizen if you're born overseas to a foreign, one of the parents was a foreigner. You still have to go through the process of being admitted. Some countries make it very hard to be naturalized as a citizen in that country. You ever heard the story of what the French Foreign Legion is all about?
Mm-mm.
It's really hard to become, it used to be very hard to become a French citizen, and France was one of the better places to go live. If you wanted to become a French citizen, one of the ways in the old days you could become a French citizen is you could enlist in the French Foreign Legion as an enlisted person. And if you served for 7 years in the French Foreign Legion as a French soldier in the French Foreign Legion, at the end of that 7 years, you could become a French citizen.
Wow. Okay.
That was the whole point of the French Foreign Legion. So they would take leftover people who couldn't otherwise qualify for anything else, join the French Foreign Legion, and 7 years later they become a French citizen. So what's the United States rules again? Jus soli, you are born on the territory of the United States makes you a U.S. citizen. Jus sanguinis, you are born to a U.S. citizen, or you can become a naturalized U.S. citizen. Can you have your citizenship taken away?
I would say yes.
Yes, but it's become a lot harder, and that's part of what we're going to talk about today. So let's start back in the 1790s and talk about a few of the complications that came up. So when the Congress first met, the very first Congress, one of the very first laws they passed was the Uniform Law of Naturalization. And in March of 1790, it said, and there's actually something racist in here, but you got to remember it was 1790. We've gotten better. We've gotten past this. We've made progress, but
But
stuff
this is the
happened.
words. Yeah.
Any alien any alien being a free white person of good character who had resided in the United States for 2 years could become a citizen of the United States by taking an oath in court to support the Constitution of the United States.
Okay.
That was the original rule. All right. What the first complication in the early 1790s was, well, some states said, well, you didn't say we couldn't make our own rules. And so New York still had its own rules, and Pennsylvania still had its own rules, and Maryland could have its own rules. And so basically in 1795, Congress passed an addition to that law, and they added the words and not otherwise. So basically, that's the only way you could become a U.S. citizen was to follow the rules passed by Congress.
Gotcha.
All right. What was the other big issue that was going on with citizenship in the late 1700s and early 1800s? In
Well,
addition to the United States saying you could become a citizen, how did the European powers feel about that? What do you think? What do you remember from stuff we've talked about?
well, I would assume that they would. Well, I would assume they would be upset about that, and they might even not recognize us, but I'm not sure yet.
Bingo. Keep
Yeah.
that thought right there. You just nailed it, hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
There's something called expatriation. And the concept of expatriation is that you lose your citizenship in your old country when you declare your allegiance to a new country.
Yeah.
The United States, from the very beginning, recognized and essentially required that anybody who became a new citizen of the United States had to swear an oath to the Constitution of the United States. And part of the tradition became that you had to affirmatively reject your prior citizenship, that you were loyal to the United States and no longer loyal
And
to.
that's real quick. That's not rare. I mean, most people, a lot of countries ask you to reject citizenship from where you're coming from.
Well,
Some of them do. I mean, I
yes and
know there's
no.
yeah,
A lot of them do now,
yeah. That's
but
what I was referring to.
in the tradition of the European royalty, basically said people born that are my subjects are always my subjects, and you cannot reject the authority of me as your king without my permission.
Ask Great Britain how that worked out for them. Ask England how that worked out for them.
Well, that was Great Britain, that was
Yeah,
France, that
I
was
know.
Sweden,
Yeah,
that was all these
yeah,
kingdoms in Europe. They basically had the idea that you
yeah.
cannot be expatriated.
Right.
So this actually mattered, especially with the Spanish, the French, and the British. Why did that matter? Because people would get on an American ship, and they would get to America, or they would get to America on a British ship or whatever, and they would stay here for 2 years, and then they would join the U.S. Navy, or they would go out on an American merchant ship, and they had become a citizen. And they would swear an oath. I am now American citizen. I swear allegiance to the Constitution. I reject my allegiance to the King of Great Britain and Ireland. And back then, Ireland was still part of Great Britain. And what did the British do when they ran across that ship in the open ocean?
Still.
You, sir, have not served your time in the British Navy. You're still an Irish citizen. You're still a British citizen. And they would round some of those people up.
Mm-hmm.
It was called impressment. And they would take American citizens, American sailors off of our ships and put them onto their ships. The French did the same thing in something that was called the Quasi War, like in 1798-99. And the British did it during the leading up to the War of 1812. The British kept doing it almost up to the Civil War. They would say, hey, prove you were born in America, because if you were born in Ireland, I don't care if you were 2 years old, you are still a British citizen.
Because you fall under the king's rule.
And they did not believe in expatriation.
Right.
They either didn't recognize your U.S. citizenship, or they considered it to be a dual citizenship, but you still had to fall under the authority of the King of England or France or whatever. The United States was the opposite. They said, once you have left that country you came from and sworn allegiance to the United States, we only recognize you as a U.S. citizen. You're either a U.S. citizen or you're not a U.S. citizen. That was the way they treated it in the 17 and 1800s.
Okay.
All right. So the first case in the Supreme Court, I like to do this as a constitutional law attorney who likes to talk about Supreme Court cases. This one's just a little bit interesting. The case of Chirac versus Leslie of Chirac in 1817 got into the question of what if somebody was made a citizen by their state, but not by the United States. And what ended up happening was this guy had been a French citizen. He became a citizen of Maryland by Maryland law during the time period between the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution being adopted, but he never had been admitted as a U.S. citizen during the time period that he bought a bunch of land.
Okay.
And so then later, when he became a U.S. citizen and died, it ended up mattering that he didn't have a will, and that when he bought the land, the United States recognized him to be a French citizen, not an American citizen, when he took ownership of the land. So it ended up mattering of which of his heirs would get the land, whether that was the Maryland heirs or the French heirs. The case went all the way to Supreme Court on the question of, did the Maryland heirs get the land because technically he was a Maryland citizen, or did the French heirs get the land because he was still a French citizen when he bought the land? And the Supreme Court ultimately said the French heirs get the land because he was not yet a U.S. citizen and Maryland could not grant citizenship.
Wow. Okay.
So that was the first kind of fight over this. So technically, it mattered that he was a French citizen when he bought the land to his heirs. That was just one of those. It gets a little complicated. All right. Here's another question. Can you grant citizenship to a group of people at the same time? It's called collective naturalization.
I'm gonna say no. No, I'm gonna say we can. I'm gonna say I'm reversing my decision.
Can you think of an
Yes,
example when that might have been a question?
Native Americans.
How about when we bought Florida from Spain or bought Louisiana
Oh,
from the French?
yeah. Okay.
All of a sudden, we entered into a treaty with Florida to take in the United take in, we entered a treaty with Spain to take territory and add it to the United States that eventually became Florida. So it was a whole bunch of Spanish colonials, Spanish citizens, also Indians, also some people who had moved down from what became the United States into Florida, all mixed together down there. But the land was Spanish when we bought Florida. When we bought the Louisiana Purchase from France, there was a huge territory, but a special bunch of people around New Orleans that were French citizens. So Congress basically passed a law that said they were all grandfathered in and became U.S. citizens on the day of the purchase.
Okay. Wow.
It also happened when we took over some territory from Mexico in the Mexican-American War, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. When we took over what became part of what is now Arizona and New Mexico, basically we told the citizens, the people there, you can either swear allegiance to the United States or you can maintain that you're a Mexican citizen, but you have to choose one or the other. And a whole bunch of those people immediately said, I want to be a citizen of the United States. And they became U.S. citizens as soon as they took the oath. And even though they had been Mexican citizens, they didn't lose their land. Even the Mexicans didn't lose their land. They just didn't have the rights as U.S. citizens if they chose to keep their Mexican nationality. Basically, they lived in property that today I'm living in Mexico. Oh, now I'm living in the United States. Now I got to decide, am I Mexican or am I a citizen of the United States? But they had the right to choose. So what were some of the other things that the United States ended up putting into these early laws? So what ultimately happened was the original set of, to become a citizen, you had to live in the United States for 5 years, is what they passed in 1795. Be of good moral character, attached to the principles of the Constitution of the United States, and well disposed to the good order and happiness of the United States. Take a formal oath to support the Constitution and renounce any foreign allegiance, and renounce any hereditary titles. You cannot be a U.S. citizen and have a title in Great Britain.
Right.
When you're naturalized, you have to renounce those titles. All right. Just to kind of finish up, what does it take to be a citizen? And then we're going to talk about what it takes to have it taken away. What have we added to that now? What does it take to become a U.S. citizen?
You got to be you got 18. You got to be
Gotta be
18.
18. Yep.
And you got, well, you already said 5 years. You got to live here for 5 years. What was
Actually,
the
they've changed it. Now it's have a green card for 5 years and be
okay.
physically present for at least half that time.
Okay, I thought it was be present for 5 years too.
It's have a
Okay.
green card for
And
5
then
years and be physically present for 2.5 out of 5 years.
and don't you also have to, speak English?
Competency in English,
Yeah.
be of good moral character, which now basically excludes people who advocate for world communism or the violent overthrow of the government of the United States.
Okay. Um,
You have to register for military service.
but no, real quick, just the men?
Yeah, just the men.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, that's I'm asking,
yeah.
yeah.
And what else?
And don't you have to pass a test?
You have to pass a test and you have to swear allegiance to the United States.
Yeah. Okay. I got a couple of them.
All right. We'll come back to that test in a little while.
Yeah. You're gonna embarrass me, I bet. But go ahead. You
Now,
snappy.
here's the question. Over time, what the Supreme Court's dealt with a lot more is not what it takes to become a U.S. citizen, but how it can be taken away.
Mm,
And that's what we're going to talk about for the rest of this podcast. So recently, the Supreme Court, I'm just going to tell you the least you need to know very quickly. The least you need to know is recently the Supreme Court has made it very hard for someone to lose their citizenship, but that has not always been the case. In fact, early on, it was pretty easy to lose your citizenship. What were some of the things that they might look for? Go ahead.
oh, I thought you were asking. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. What do you
No, I was gonna say
do you have any guess?
treason.
Treason?
Spies being treason.
Yeah.
Being some, planning to overthrow the government, that kind of stuff.
Deserting
Deserting.
in
Yeah.
wartime. How about voting in a foreign election or acting as if you were a citizen of that country?
Yeah. Absolutely. You're out,
Those,
buddy.
yep.
Missy.
Leaving the country to evade military service, claiming the benefits of a foreign nationality, residing overseas on a regular basis and claiming the benefits of living in that country. Those are the kind of things that they looked at. And here's one that kind of shocked me. I told you earlier we would talk about women's rights. We're going to talk about you've come a long way, baby. Here's a good example.
Okay.
McKenzie versus Hare in 1915, the Supreme Court had to answer this question. A woman who was born in California, so she's a U.S. citizen by birth.
Okay.
She lives in California. She marries a British citizen. She marries Mr. McKenzie. The state of California won't let her vote anymore, even though California allowed women to vote at the time. This is before the women's suffrage was adopted in the Constitution a few years later. But some states allowed women to vote. Women
Yeah.
said, the state of California said, you've lost your right to vote. You are no longer a U.S. citizen. Why? Because you married a foreign national, even though you live in the United States. She took that all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said this, listen to this kind of language. The identity of the husband and wife is an ancient principle of our jurisprudence. That is, that a married couple should be treated as a single legal entity represented by the husband. Marriage is conditionally voluntary entered into with notice of consequences. We concur with counsel for the plaintiff that citizenship is of tangible worth, and we sympathize with plaintiff in her desire to retain it and her earnest assertion of it. But this involves more than personal considerations. The marriage of an American woman with a foreigner has consequences of like kind, may involve national complications of like kind, and her physical expatriation may involve. Therefore, as long as the relation lasts, it is made tantamount to expatriation.
Wow.
So the United States Supreme Court said in 1915 that if a U.S. citizen living in the United States married if a U.S. citizen who's a woman
Woman.
married a man who was a foreign national, then she lost her U.S. citizenship, although she could get it back if they got divorced or he passed away. That is how bad it was back in the old days.
I'm assuming that got reversed or changed down through the course of history.
It did. It wasn't by
Yeah.
Supreme Court case. Everybody just kind of knew that had gone away. But the cases that now talk about it, it's clearly a lot harder to do.
Yeah. I'm with you.
All right. So let's talk about what are some of the stuff, the other ways you can lose citizenship. This one comes up in 1958, and the case is called Perez versus Brownell.
Mm-hmm.
Clemente Martinez Perez was born in El Paso, Texas. So he's a U.S. citizen. He was born in 1909. He lived in the United States until about 1920, and then his parents took him to Mexico. Only later on, so he was like 10 when he moved to Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
When he was 19, his parents told him that he had been born in Texas. So he ends up applying to come to the United States to work during World War II as a Mexican alien. So he says, I'm a Mexican citizen, which technically he was because his parents were Mexican, even though he was born in the United States. He effectively had Mexican citizenship according to Mexico, but he had American citizenship according to the United States because he was born in the United States. But when he wanted to come work in the United States during World War II, he put on his form that he wanted to work as a Mexican national. They had a special rule because they needed people to work during World War II when a lot of the men and women had gone off to join the 16 million people that put on a uniform during World War II. They allowed Mexicans to come in and work. So he said he was a native-born Mexican. However, later he went back to Mexico and he said, I want to come back to the United States. And oh, by the way, I was born in Texas. And so I want to be treated as a U.S. citizen. So after World War II, he comes back and the United States arrests him because if you're a U.S. citizen, you failed to register for the draft
Yeah.
during World War II.
Mm.
He admitted that between the years of 1944 and 47, that he left the United States, did his job in the railroad for a few years, left, and he did it to avoid military service, and he voted in the election in Mexico in 1946.
Oh, wow. He's
So
out.
he both voted in a foreign election and avoided the draft in the United States and held himself out to be a Mexican national. And the Supreme Court ultimately held that those acts were engaged in voluntarily. And even though he didn't intend to lose his citizenship, that was enough to qualify under the Nationality Act to be expatriated, and he lost his U.S. citizenship.
I understand that one. I don't understand the woman one, but I understand that one.
So he voted in a foreign election, he avoided the U.S. draft, and he affirmatively represented to the United States government that he was a Mexican citizen.
Gotcha.
And then, so he kind of screwed himself. All right, let's go on to the next one. This is Albert Tropp was born in the United States, and while he was serving in World War II, he was in the U.S. Army, and he had been arrested for basically, I think he'd been in a fight or something. He was in the Army stockade. He escaped from the stockade, so that amounted to desertion. He turned himself in a day later. He ended up being charged, found guilty in a court martial, sentenced to 3 years of hard labor, lost his pay in the Army, and got a dishonorable discharge. He comes home, he serves his time. Now it's 1952, a few years later. He applied for a passport because he wanted to travel overseas and was told that because of his desertion during World War II, he was no longer eligible for citizenship and lost his right to get a passport. So he took that to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ultimately said that as punishment for a crime, it would violate the Eighth Amendment, which is the prohibition of excessive punishment. It's cruel and unusual punishment clause.
Mm-hmm.
That it would violate the cruel and unusual punishment clause to take away the rights of a native-born U.S. citizen just because he committed a crime, even as bad as desertion. And so Earl Warren, who was a more liberal justice on the Supreme Court, wrote the majority opinion. And he said, denationalization as a punishment is barred by the Eighth Amendment. It's a form of punishment more primitive than torture and inflicts the total destruction of the individual's status in organized society. Now, it's interesting, Judge Felix Frankfurter, who was a famous sort of a little bit more conservative justice on the Supreme Court around the time, his response was, well, but somebody deserting from the military during wartime could be punished by death.
Yeah.
and if that's permitted, take away his citizenship. Here's how he put it: is the constitutional dialectic so empty a reason that it can be seriously urged that loss of citizenship is a fate worse than death?
Yeah.
So, and that's essentially what it is. You can have somebody shot for desertion, but you
But
can't
lose your citizenship. That's just too bad. That's too mean. Yeah. Yeah, I think I see the issue with that.
All right. Next interesting kind of fun story. Mitsugi Nishikawa was born in California.
Hey, how long do you practice these names?
Just said that for the first time out loud. I read it into
Well,
my mind before, but I never said it
that
out
really
loud.
pisses me off. But keep going. Sorry.
Mitsugi Nishikawa was born in California to Japanese parents. His parents were born in Japan and had Japanese citizenship. So what citizen? Was he a U.S. citizen? Yes, he was born in California. Was he a Japanese citizen? Not according to the United States, but yes, according to Japan,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
because his parents were Japanese.
I'm
And
with you.
Japanese law says if your parents are Japanese, it doesn't matter where on the planet they have a little baby. That baby is a subject of the Emperor of Japan. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So he was born in 1916, Artesia, California, becomes a U.S. citizen by birth automatically. In 1939, this is before Poland was invaded by the Nazis. The United States was not involved in any kind of war, uh, but Japan was fighting in China. His parents sent him to Japan to go to college, to learn Japanese and to study at a Japanese university. On March 1st, 1941, again before the United States was at war with Japan, he was drafted by the Japanese.
Mm.
He ended up serving as a mechanic in the Japanese army. After the war, he went to the U.S. consulate in Japan and said, "I'd like to get a U.S. passport so I can go back home to the United States." And the United States said, "No, you've lost your U.S. citizenship." So this goes all the way to the Supreme Court. What do you think the Supreme Court said?
I'm going to say that they said he was a citizen of the United States, and being drafted into the Japanese army was something he was out of his control.
Very good, Clint. You are now ready to sit on the U.S. Supreme Court.
I've been ready, man.
That is the right answer. So the way that they said it was facing the punishment. If he had resisted being drafted, he would have spent 3 years in prison or worse
Mm-hmm.
in Japan. He also testified that he was afraid that the Japanese secret police, the Kempeitai, that's the Japanese equivalent of the Gestapo, that they might have even done worse to him because it would be unheard of for somebody to disappear,
Mm-hmm.
i.e., be killed. He also testified in court that when he told other Japanese soldiers that Japan could not win the war, he was regularly beaten every day for a whole month for saying that.
Mm.
And so the United States Supreme Court ultimately said that his service in a foreign enemy army was not voluntary, and therefore he did not lose his U.S. citizenship.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes sense to me.
All right.
And if it makes sense to me, then it should probably be law of the land. That's how I view things.
Okay. Next big case, 1963, the same year that President Kennedy was shot. 1963, in a case called Kennedy versus Mendoza Martinez. And actually, I think the Kennedy in this case is Robert Kennedy, who was the attorney general. That's who gets named in the lawsuit because it's the United States Department of Justice saying this person should lose their citizenship. Francisco Mendoza Martinez was born in the United States. He moved to Mexico in 1942 for the purpose of evading the Selective Training and Service Act of 1940. He was ultimately, when he returned to the United States, he was arrested and sent to prison for a year for being a draft dodger. The question was, could he also have the punishment of having his U.S. citizenship taken away?
Okay. Well. Okay.
What do you think? So he ran off to Mexico to avoid the draft
Well,
during
no, he
World War
loses
II.
it then. If you try to avoid the draft by going to another country, then you lose your citizenship. We've already had this case I think once in a different way, right?
Right, but they've overturned it. So this case changes that and
This
says
is okay.
that that his conviction for evading the draft was proper. But remember what we said about the guy who ran away from the brig in Morocco, that
Right.
they couldn't punish him by taking away his U.S. citizenship. They could punish him for desertion. So this guy, Mr. Mendoza Martinez, the Supreme Court rules he did not have the intent to give up his citizenship. and they can't punish him by taking away his citizenship. He was a natural born U.S. citizen. We can send him to jail for avoiding the draft, but we cannot revoke his citizenship for breaking the law.
Okay.
All right.
All right, I'm on board now. You've
Okay.
convinced me.
Okay.
I will succumb to my fellow Supreme Court judges.
All right. Next year, Schneider versus Rusk. So Angelica Schneider was a German immigrant. She came to the United States with her parents, and they became U.S. citizens. And when they did, because her parents had become U.S. citizens under the rules in place at the time, she automatically became a U.S. citizen at 16, even though she'd been born in Germany. Her parents were U.S. citizens, and she was living in the United States. So at age 16, she becomes a U.S.
And she
citizen.
was a minor, right?
She was a minor when she
Yeah.
became a
So
U.S. citizen.
yeah.
All right. She went to college in the United States. Then she moved back to Germany. She was German too. She spoke German. She wanted to spend some time in Germany. The State Department said, well, that means you've lost your U.S. citizenship because she went to Germany and stayed there for more than 3 years.
All right. Are you asking me, or is
Yeah,
this?
what do you think the Supreme Court's going to rule on that one? So she was not born in the United States. She was not born a citizen. She became a naturalized citizen. And the United States had a law that said if you become a naturalized citizen and you return to your native country for more than 3 years
Well, if that's the
without permission of
case,
the United
yeah,
States, then you lose your citizenship. What do you think the
I
Supreme
think she
Court's going
lost her citizenship.
to do? Nope. Supreme
Okay.
Court says equal protection. We would not, if you or I moved to Germany for 3 years, would we lose our citizenship if we didn't do anything just but move there?
No. Okay. Yeah.
And they said basically, so if an American born
Once
in the
you're a
United
citizen,
States,
you're a
you're a
citizen.
citizen, you're a citizen. We can't just say
There's
if you
no
do
distinction. Yeah.
right. We should not distinguish between someone who is naturalized and someone who was born here, absent something really extreme.
I got you. That
All
makes
right.
sense. I should have thought that one through more.
Well,
I blame my high school teachers. Go ahead.
all right. So then the next one that really kind of changes things, or even makes it more clear how hard it's going to be to take away citizenship, Ephroim versus Rusk. So Mr. Ephroim, and let me see if I
What
can
year
find
was
this.
this?
This is 1967.
All right.
And Mr. Ephroim, I'm trying to find his first name. I may not. Oh, here it is. Bays, Beys, Ephroim, was born in Poland, moved to the United States, became a U.S. citizen living in the United States, but then he moved to Israel with his family for a while. And remember in 1967, that was one of the Arab-Israeli wars was happening over there. What else happened? Well, they had an election, and he ended up voting in the for his member of parliament. This the Israeli Knesset. He ended up voting in the Knesset election
How do you vote in a country you're not a citizen of?
because Israel recognizes citizenship because he's a Jew.
Oh, from Poland. Yeah. Okay. My bad.
He
Yeah,
was
I got
born
you.
in Poland, lived in the United States, became a U.S. citizen, but Israel has its own
Yeah.
laws
Yeah. Yeah. I
that
got you.
basically, if you're a Jew born somewhere outside, but you move to Israel, you can become a citizen of Israel pretty quickly as a Jew. I think back then it may have been almost automatic. Like
Okay.
you just, as soon as you get there, if
You're
you're
a member
Jewish,
of the Jewish nation. Yeah, I got
yeah,
you.
you
Israel.
become a citizen of Israel. I don't remember exactly what the rules were in the 60s in Israel, but I'm pretty sure
But
because Israel was founded in 1948 and they were looking for citizens.
when you vote in another election, I'm going to
We
say
had
that he lost it, but
we
you
had
know,
traditionally said that that was an indication that you were abandoning your
yeah,
citizenship. So what the Supreme Court said is, wait a minute. Congress can set out certain things that might be an indication of somebody wanting to abandon their citizenship. But if they do one of those things, like voting in a foreign election, serving in a foreign military voluntarily, serving as an officer in a foreign military, serving as an officer in a foreign government, that those things might be things that it would be okay for Congress to say you shouldn't do, but they cannot say that they automatically revoke your citizenship if you don't have the intent to give up
Ah.
your citizenship.
See,
So
this is
now
what frustrates me about law. It's so hard to prove intent. I don't. It's just it makes it so messy. And I'm not saying I'm right or wrong. It just personally, it seems to make it so vague that I can twist it to be whatever I want, and we can, if we're not careful, we can just get further and further away from what it was intended. So,
I think that's a great comment, and the way the answer in the Supreme Court would be is, yeah, that's exactly right. That's what we want it to be. We don't want people to lose their citizenship just because they do certain things.
well,
They might not understand that it's going to make them lose their citizenship just because they voted in an election in Israel or they voted in an election in Canada or Mexico or whatever. What the Supreme Court is ultimately saying is your U.S. citizenship is so valuable that you have a fundamental due process right to your citizenship, and that it takes you saying, screw America, death to America, I'm going to join ISIS, or I'm going to go join ISIS, and I don't want to be a U.S. citizen anymore. I'm going to go move to Israel, and I'm only a Jew. I'm no longer an American. I don't want to be a U.S. citizen anymore.
okay.
I never want to hear about America
So,
again.
okay.
That's
All
what
right.
they're now looking for.
So you can't, okay. All right. Well,
That's the new rule. Yeah, that's
yeah.
what we're leading up to.
All right. I'm shutting up.
No, it's okay. Ask questions, but I'm just telling you
I
that's what they said.
I get it. I just all right. I'm gonna just kind of. I'll wait and make my comments in a minute.
Yeah, I'll just read a little bit of this. All persons born or naturalized in the United States are citizens of the United States. There is no indication in those words of a fleeting citizenship, good at the moment it is acquired, but subject to destruction by the government at any time. Rather, the 14th Amendment can most reasonably read as defining citizenship with a citizen keeps unless he voluntarily relinquishes it. Once acquired, the 14th Amendment citizenship cannot be shifted, canceled, or diluted at the will of the federal government, the states, or any other governmental unit.
I don't. I agree with that. What I'm saying is, I think actions can be deemed willingness, and so the only thing I like they said is it says it may not, which means it could be subject to what I talk about all the time is some common sense. So if Eric goes, I had no idea, in his actions, you can prove that he had no idea, versus Eric did it, and there's proof that he did it with malice, then all of a sudden those two things can be judged differently.
So hold that thought. I got one more case to
I'm
talk
holding a
about.
lot of thoughts here, dude.
Yep,
Dual citizenship. I'm holding thoughts on that. I'm holding
we're
thoughts
about
on
we're about to
this.
talk about that.
All
So
right.
first of all,
My
this
brain.
decision, the Ephraim decision, is when legal scholars basically say, well, the United States has always said we don't recognize dual citizenship. If you have an allegiance to a foreign country, you are risking losing your citizenship in the United States. You're indicating you don't want to be a U.S. citizen and a foreign citizen. You're not supposed to do that. This Ephraim case basically says, de facto, we'll wink, wink, nod, nod. We will accept dual citizenship, because becoming a citizen and acting like a citizen in another country does not make you lose your U.S. citizenship unless you affirmatively say some magic words like "death to America."
So if
I
you
don't
don't say
want to.
the magic words, but you have an ill intent in your heart, then you can just skate.
It might be. It might be. I think that if you do something really bad, like go put on a black robe and run around with ISIS and shoot at American troops and do that kind of stuff, that might be enough to
Hasn't that
indicate.
actually happened?
Yeah, and
I
it
think
still
that's
might be.
actually
You can
happened.
still punish them for war crimes. I just don't know that you can strip their citizenship.
Well,
But
okay, real quick, can I say something? Because I this
yeah,
is
because
the
there's a couple more rules coming up, and
well, but
then
I was just going to say it's hard. It would be hard then to punish Eric as an American citizen if I revoke his citizenship. So if you break rules and commit crimes against Americans, it would be hard for me to hold you accountable as an American under our American laws. So it almost would benefit me to keep you as an American, bring you back home, and then you're subject to American justice.
or you can send a cruise missile at an American citizen overseas when they're
Bah,
acting up
bah,
with the
bah.
enemy. And I'm not going to make a political comment about that. That was just a position of the Obama administration.
Yes,
We could debate whether or not that was legal or illegal
gotcha.
differently. That, but I'm just
But it
telling
was
you, just
done.
include that in the list of interesting questions.
Gotcha. All right.
All right. So what happens after the Ephraim case? Is basically it becomes a little easier for somebody to be a dual citizen. The United States is not looking so hard just to cancel your other citizenship or cancel your U.S. citizenship. There's one last exception to this idea that everybody, once you're a citizen, you get to keep your citizenship. That has to do with just kind of normal stuff, not doing something necessarily bad. In 1971, in the situation of Rogers versus Belli, so Have you ever heard of any stories of an American woman going to Italy and finding a good-looking Italian man and falling in love?
There's a couple of
Imagine that
movies.
happening, right?
There's a couple of movies I think about
It
that. Yes.
happens several times, right?
Yes.
So the good-looking Italian man charms the beautiful young American woman who's on vacation in Italy, and in this case, that's
He's wearing the white linen clothes, eating the Mediterranean food. Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
speaking in a beautiful Italian accent,
Olive
and
skin. I
all
understand.
yeah,
Yeah.
very muscular,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Takes the young lady, shows her Rome, shows her around some of the other
He's
places,
no Irish guy, but we'll give him that. Go ahead.
and they get married.
Mm-hmm.
They have a baby. The baby gets a notice from the government that says, and this is in 1971, so
From
this is
our
the
government?
rules at the time, gets a notice from the U.S. government.
Okay.
Because your mom was born in was a U.S. citizen, then you have U.S. citizenship. But in order to keep your U.S. citizenship, you have to return to the United States and live at least 5 years in the United States before you turn 28.
Okay.
That was the rule at the time. So if you have citizenship by blood, not by being born in the United States, but jus sanguinis, the citizenship by blood because your mom was U.S. citizen, the law that Congress had passed at the time said in order to really have a lifetime
To
citizenship,
claim that, yeah.
to claim that you need to live in the United States for 5 years before you turn 28. And the idea being that if mom happened to have a kid overseas and then moves back to the United States, okay, that's fine. But if you're going to move overseas and never bring that kid to the United States, that's not something we should have United States citizens being born all over the world.
Yeah, you gotta have some skin in the game, man. You gotta have something invested here. I got you. Okay.
So the Supreme Court ultimately ruled that that law was constitutional.
Okay.
And here's the distinction they made between this equal protection, all American citizens are the same. Let's get really technical. The 14th Amendment. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. That's the constitutional requirement. If you're born in the United States or naturalized under the Constitution, those two are equal. But if you have jus sanguinis citizenship, if you have citizenship by blood, that's a congressional law that allows you to keep that citizenship. It is not a guarantee in the U.S. Constitution.
Okay. Oh,
Being
okay.
born to an American citizen overseas is not a guaranteed constitutional
That's
right.
something you have to do something to claim it. Basically, there's an
Well,
expectation there.
the key part is that that is not a constitutional right, that it's
Right.
a type of citizenship created by Congress. So Congress can take it away.
Okay.
So
Restricted
Congress
or
can
something.
set the
Yeah.
rules. If you want to keep it this way. Now, if you're born in the United States, Congress can't take it away.
Mm-hmm. I'm with
If
you.
you're naturalized under the rules by moving to the United States, taking the test, following all the rules, they can't take it away. But if you were born overseas, they can take it away because it doesn't fall under the 14th Amendment. That's the 1971 case. Now, just for our listeners who are going, oh my God, that's horrible. All these people have to travel to the United States to lose their U.S. citizenship. Congress actually changed the law a little while later, and now it's not a requirement that you spend that time in the United States. So if an American citizen has a baby overseas, that baby becomes a U.S. citizen. But Congress could change that
Wow. Okay.
or how those rules work. But in 1978, they changed that rule. It's been since 1978 that if mom or dad is a U.S. citizen and they have a baby overseas, that baby
Yeah,
could get a U.S.
like
passport.
45 years, dude. So yeah,
Yep.
it's been a long time.
Yep. Okay. Next quick story. Vance versus Terrazas, 1980. Lawrence Terrazas was born in the United States. His father was Mexican, and Mexican law follows jus sanguinis, which means he also gets to be a Mexican citizen.
Mm-hmm.
He ends up, let's see, he went to a Mexican university in 1970. Now, why would you go to Mexican university in 1970 if you're a young man? What was going on in 1970?
The draft.
Yeah, the Vietnam War. So
The
we have
Vietnam
another
War.
draft.
Yeah.
We have another draft issue. So he goes to a Mexican university, and when he applies for admission to this Mexican university, they want to know if he's a Mexican national. Well, technically, he has dual citizenship. He signs on the form, I renounce United States citizenship as well as any submission, obedience, and loyalty to any foreign government, especially that of the United States of America. The Mexicans put that on their form for him to go to school in Mexico.
Okay.
So he signs that form. He goes back later on and goes to a U.S. consul and says, "I need my American passport." And they get the paperwork. They find out he signed this form. He also gives conflicting answers of whether he truly intended to abandon his rights as a U.S. citizen. So what the Supreme Court says is that the standard that the court is supposed to review is whether he actually expressed his intent to relinquish his citizenship, and that the government needed to prove that by preponderance of the evidence.
You mean like the document he signed?
Here's the important test from this case. It's not enough to just sign that document per se. It's not automatic if you sign the document.
Okay.
The question is that sufficient evidence that he intended to relinquish his U.S. citizenship? And the test is preponderance of the evidence. So let's just have a little side note and talk about what are the different standards of review in court. If you want to prove that somebody is guilty of a crime, you have to prove that he's guilty beyond a reasonable doubt.
Mm-hmm.
And the analogy I use for that is basically if you're on a football field and you start at the 20-yard line and you run down the field and you make play after play, or you keep running plays or you keep making passes, when do you get points in a football game? Well, you have to cross the goal line to get your 6 points for your touchdown. You have to get all the way 100% down the field to the goal line. That is the definition of what is beyond a reasonable doubt. That's what it takes to convict you or me if we go to court. And when they find out that time you robbed the liquor store, Clint, if they're going to prove it was
Yeah.
really you, they have to do it beyond a reasonable doubt. They have to score a touchdown.
Gotcha.
Another standard is one that's called clear and convincing evidence. Basically, you got to get to the red zone. You got to get down to within the 20-yard line at the other end. You have 80% there. That's one way of looking at it. You've got to get close enough you could kick a field goal.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to be pretty close to the touchdown, but you don't have to have absolute proof. You don't have to get it into the end zone. You just have most of the way down the football field. That's the test that some judges wanted to use on whether he wanted to give up his citizenship. But the majority opinion essentially says, no, it's only a preponderance of the evidence. What's a preponderance of the evidence? It's the 50-yard line. Did you get halfway there? If we weigh two things on a scale, and for people not watching the video, I'm holding my hands up
like a
I'm
scale balancing.
and if you're barely one over the other, that's preponderance of the evidence.
51 over 49. Yeah.
50.001
over
40.0099.
Yeah.
Right? So all you need is that little tiny bit, 50 per one, and that's what the Supreme Court ultimately said is that's the test. And then they remanded the case back to the lower courts to actually apply that test to this case. And at the end of the day, they actually said him signing that form was enough for him to lose his citizenship.
Okay, well, yeah, thank goodness, because my mouth was agape for our listeners, because if they'd have come up and said he signed the form during draft times, and that's just ridiculous. I mean, he said it, he admitted it. I mean, don't sign the form. I hate to say it.
Here's the bad news, though.
Oh no,
the modern instructions that the State Department uses is simply to say if they find out someone signed a form like that, they ask the person on an application, oh, you're trying to get your U.S. passport or recognized as a U.S. citizen at this consulate here in, Ethiopia or Mexico or whatever. Did you ever intend to relinquish your U.S. citizenship when performing one of the acts on the list? If the answer is no, the consular officer will certify that it was not the person's intent to relinquish U.S. citizenship and consequently find the person has retained U.S. citizenship.
God,
Now, it might be different if they're draft dodging. I think it might be different if there's draft dodging. But and by the way, that's actually executive order level stuff. That's the kind of stuff the president can change at any given time, is what's the test you're going to ask at the U.S. consulate. And the current test, it has been since 1990, So this is a test put in under 1990 would have been George Bush
George
Sr.,
Bush, the
right?
yeah, the senior, yeah.
So the test that was put in the State Department under George Bush Sr. was to ask the question, did you intend to relinquish your U.S. citizenship when you signed a form like that, or you voted in a foreign election, or you served in a foreign
Oh,
military?
so all of a sudden it's more convenient for me to come back and be an American citizen. No, I didn't mean to.
If
That's
the
ridiculous.
answer is no,
Yeah.
why is that not changed, you think, Clint?
I don't know, dude. I'm
Have
frustrated
you ever
now
heard of
with
this before?
politics.
Have you ever heard of this before?
Heard of what? This?
How easy it is to
Oh.
go in and say, no, I did. When I signed the form
Oh, no,
saying,
I've never heard
saying
of this.
death to
No.
America, I
I
want to
had
go to
no
school
idea.
in Mexico. Right. So when
Yeah.
they changed that back in 1990, how many presidents have you ever thought, or any of the cabinet members have thought, maybe we ought to make it harder for people to come back to the United States if they've relinquished their citizenship
Yeah,
that
we ought to
way?
have some consequences for
We
that.
put this policy in effect in 1990, and I don't know of any presidents who ever have you ever heard anybody discuss this
No,
before?
it's the first
That's
time I've
kind of
heard
my
about
point. I
it.
think the momentum is that's the way the rule for the last 30 years is because no one's ever thought to change the rule.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
What
That's
they
my
could be
point,
doing,
opinion.
what they could be doing is putting a preponderance of the evidence test in, or maybe a clear and convincing evidence test, because that's kind of what the minority said in that case.
If you've signed the document and said the words or agreed to the words, how about you just lose your citizenship?
Well, then you get at least I have a defense. I was made to do it. They put a gun to my head. I would have been
But
in
that's
jail if I had.
that goes
Right, I
back to
have
the
that. You would have.
Japanese
Yeah,
thing we
yeah.
talked about. That
That
that makes sense.
right.
That makes
So
sense.
that should be the fight, right?
Yeah, well, but we don't know any of the details on this when we just say, "Hey, did you mean to?"
Clint, it
Nope.
was in
Come on
Spanish. I
back
didn't
in.
realize I was signing.
Whatever.
So
That's
what? I mean, could I
ridiculous.
raise that defense?
No, you can't. You're out of the court, Eric. I,
So right, but
you're barred from
you would agree
practicing law.
I should at least have the right to go to trial to say I didn't understand what I was saying, and clear and convincing evidence or preponderance of the evidence, one of those tests that the government would
How do you
say,
sign
yeah,
something
you
in a
did.
language you don't understand? That's ridiculous. I want to be a lawyer on the other side of that one. I think I can win that case.
I
How
think
did you
I think
sign? How
I
did you
think
sign it and not
the
know it?
signing something that I didn't understand is a valid defense.
I, but,
Speaking Spanish and signing that form and knowing what you signed, I think I might have a hard time on that jury saying that by a preponderance of the evidence that guy did not intend to give up his citizenship.
I want people to raise their hand that has signed a document in a language that you can't read. I'm not saying we don't sign documents we don't read. I'm saying, but I'm still held to the consequence. How many people have signed a document that's in another language that you can't read?
Hey, what if it
That's
said that?
ridiculous.
What if it said when you accepted the terms of service for your social media contract that you renounced your U.S. citizenship?
I'd be screwed because I don't read anything like that. I would be out. I would hope that Eric would represent me in the court of law, sir. I'm coming to
So,
you.
so two big changes that has become essentially the de facto rule because the State Department has put it in place, and so it's easier for people to have dual citizenship, and it's just not being fought over anymore. The technical rule is though, when you sign a form renouncing your citizenship like that, the government could have in place a rule that says we can take you to court and a preponderance of the evidence shows you intended to relinquish your citizenship.
Okay.
All right. So the things that the Department of State looks for on the list are things like you become a citizen of another state, you declare allegiance to another state, you serve in the armed forces of the United States, or you serve in the government of the United States of another state. But any of those that happen, if you say, well, I didn't intend to give up my citizenship, right now you just sign that form. If they wanted to change the rules, if the State Department just simply changed the rules that said, well, by any of those things, then we need to review and decide by the preponderance of the evidence whether you intended to relinquish your citizenship. That's what the Supreme Court said would be
I think we
permissible.
should do that because that adds value back to being a citizen. I think one of the issues we're having, this is Clinton editorializing a little bit, is we've devalued what it is to be an American citizen by not controlling the borders and by just making it easier for people to do stuff like this. Now that's Clint's opinion, and please disagree with me if you want. And I mean nothing ill towards anybody by saying it. Back to you,
So
Eric Buchanan.
the last part of this story I'm going to talk about, because I want to
Okay.
wrap this up by agreeing with you about the value of American citizenship. I would like to recommend that anybody who's gotten this far into this podcast and is enjoying this conversation that you read the short story "A Man Without a Country." Edward Everett Hale published this story in the Atlantic magazine as a short story in 1863 at the height of the Civil War. The short. I'm gonna, and if you're gonna go read it and you don't want me to spoil it, spoiler alert, I'm gonna tell the basic story for those that want to hear it.
Here you go. Five, four, three, two, one. Go, Eric.
So, uh, the true event that the story is based on was Aaron Burr, the guy who shot Alexander Hamilton, was charged with treason in 1807. Edward Everett Hale's tale takes a character who actually was around at that time, a guy named Philip Nolan, and fictionalizes this further tale that Philip Nolan was actually an accomplice of Aaron Burr and had engaged in some of the behavior that might be considered to be treasonous. When he is brought to trial, he's so frustrated with being charged with the things that he did that in this short story, he says when he's giving his testimony out loud, he says with a foul oath, he angrily shouts, "I wish I may never hear of the United States again." The
Uh oh.
judge, shocked by this statement, Philip Nolan is convicted of treason, his punishment is that he is sent to go live on U.S. Navy ships at sea, where he will be accorded the courtesies of his rank as a lieutenant in the Army, so he can eat in the officer's mess and he has his own room. But he is never allowed to be told any news about the United States. So none of the sailors are allowed to tell him anything that happens in the United States. None of the other officers are allowed to talk to him about anything that happens in the United States. He's allowed to read the newspapers from other countries, but anything that mentions the United States is cut out of the newspapers before he's allowed to see them. As the story goes on, he's become desperate for news about the United States. He's so ashamed of what he did, and so much regrets that. There's one scene in the book where he's actually invited to a dance on the ship, and a young lady is dancing with him, and he recognizes her as being somebody that he'd met before, and he tries to ask her for stories about what's going on at home and with the United States, and she understands the punishment, and she dumps him and leaves him standing there on the dance floor. It
Mm.
goes like that for the rest of his life. And in 1863, as he's lying on his deathbed, he begs the captain of the ship to tell him something about the news of the United States, and the short story concludes with the captain relinquishing and telling him basically the history of the United States from 1807 to 1860, but he doesn't tell him about the Civil War that's currently going on because he doesn't want to ruin the guy's belief in how great America really is. And as he passes away, and they pack up his stuff and they go into his room, they find a shrine to the United States where he's got George Washington with American flags with 15 or 16 stars, whatever it was in 1807,
Mm.
with an American eagle and a map of the United States where he imagined the borders would be and what would be going on, even though he had no news his whole life of the United States.
Mm.
And the other regret of not having a country to love and a country to follow is what this story is all about. Renouncing your citizenship in the United States should be a devastating thing.
You know what's really? I'm going to say this to you, and then we're going to wrap it up. There are people that say this to me, and I don't mean this in a bad way. I've traveled. The only country I've ever been to other than the United States is Jamaica, but I've traveled. So I'm not a world traveler. Everybody that knows me would giggle even saying that I had to say that out loud. But I, for some reason, have been blessed with this mindset of I know how bad it is. I've got friends like you. I've got family that have traveled. I've never experienced it, but to me, it's so sad and just disheartening when I see Americans, and this is the editorial part of this, and I'm fine with it on this one, just not value what it is to be an American and not give America its due for the bad and the good we've done. When you travel the world, you're going to be amazed how many times there's great places around this world, but how many people, when you go overseas, they're stuck someplace that we have progressed through. You've traveled the world, dude. You've seen how lucky you are to be in America. I'm not saying there's not other great places to live. I'm just saying more people than not everyone. If you say, hey, where do you want to go live at, would raise their hand and say, hey, take me to the United States of America every time.
Can I just as a moment of like my personal version of that?
I'm going to let
Um
you end it. Okay. So after this, I'm just stopping it.
yeah, so my wife and I enjoy traveling. I went to Europe multiple times when I was in the Navy. And we like going over there to play golf and to tour, Rome and London and those places. Love going to Scotland. Really like going to visit over there in Europe. But when I get done with the trip, it is a really, to me, a special moment when you get off the plane and you get through customs and you get to the first time you talk to an American when you get back to the United States who's an official. And if they're a good one, welcome home is a really special moment there. Some of 'em,
Mm,
many don't do that, but some do. I that really means something. And the one that really got me was when I was in the Navy. We were babysitting a broken down plane in the Netherlands, and it was fun. We had about a week off where we were having to do some duty on the plane, but we were waiting for an engine to be delivered, so we had several days off. And so we got permission to leave the base, and we had to go to The Hague to get a check cashed so we would have spending money so we could eat meals for the 3 or 4 days that we were sitting there waiting for this engine to be delivered. And basically, it was a little break. It was one of those really fun moments in the Navy. It doesn't happen very often, but we had 3 or 4 days. We needed cash. We were allowed to go off base. Went to the embassy in The Hague in the Netherlands to get the check cashed. And as we walked in the door, there was this large, not too old, probably in his 50s or early 60s, African American guy in a suit and tie who I found out later on was a retired warrant officer. And it was his job to stand there when we walked in to kind of like a Walmart greeter. Where do you need to go? And as we come walking up the steps, he looks at us and says, "Are you guys Americans?" "Yes." "In the military?" "Yes, we're naval officers." "Well, welcome to the United States of America. Welcome to our embassy here in the Netherlands. What can I do for you guys?"
mm, mm.
Little piece of America while we were traveling.
Thank you very much, Eric Buchanan.
Good show today, Clint. Good
Yeah.
job.
All right. See you, buddy.
See ya.